Well, good morning. I hope everyone's having a lovely day. It's straight up noon, so it's time to get started. First of all, I want to welcome you, and second of all, I want to again thank our volunteers for all the work they do. Make this happen. I want to thank Jeff for pinch hitting for me last month. I was on vacation with my wife, and also, I'm going to have to get my glasses out, y'all, to read my notes. There we go. Yeah, thank you. I want to remind everyone that next month's speaker will be Brooks Eason, who will review his book, The Scoutmaster's Lesson in Service and Leadership, from an American hero, Paul Eason. And we all, of course, have fond memories of Mr. Eason. He was a man of great character and did a wonder here in Tupelo and surrounding area, especially as a scoutmaster. Another note, due to Thanksgiving, we have moved the November meeting to November 29th. So instead of the fourth Wednesday, it'll be the fifth Wednesday. And we'll put that, of course, in the newsletter, and it'll run in the paper also. Also, I've got some very exciting news. Following Dr. Wiley's presentation, our own Lisa Reed and Jack will have some very important news for us. And so please hang around for a few minutes and let's hear what they have to say. Next, I'm very privileged and honored to share with you that we have a new director of the Lee County Library. His name is Philip Shackelford. Give him a welcome. And he's going to say a few words in just a minute, but I wanted to share a few things with you. He grew up in Ripley, made his way to Ohio with his family. His dad took a new job there and got most of his education there at Kent State in Ohio, and then made his way to Arkansas, and now he's back home. So he's going to fit in nicely. He understands the culture in the South, so he's going to fit in great. He's not a Midwestern like I was. I grew up in Chicago, for those of you that, and I immediately had to change my accent. This is going to take a whooping. Anyway, he was previous role as library director at South Arkansas College, past president of the Arkansas Library Association, author of Rise of the Mavericks, the U.S. Air Force Security Service, and the Cold War Naval History book. That's 2023. That was just published. He has a BA in history, an MA in history, and he also has a graduate degree in library and information science. And all of that's from Kent State. So I want y'all to welcome again, Philip.
Well, thank you guys for the warm welcome, and thank you for being here. It's exciting to see you all here today. This is my first luncheon with books to attend, so I'm very honored and very excited to get here and be able to attend and experience the program with you today. I just want to share what an honor it is to be joining the team here. It's exciting, an opportunity. I'm glad to be here, glad to be jumping into the important work that the library staff and this library is doing. It's obvious that this library holds a very special place in the heart of this community. That's good to see, and I'm glad to get to meet all of you and experience that for myself, and look forward to the years ahead. So thank you for this opportunity, and I hope you enjoy the program today. Thank you.
Moving right along, I want to introduce our speaker. Most of you, or many of you will know this gentleman. Our speaker today is Dr. Thomas Wiley. He'll review his book, Pushmataha, The Forgotten Warrior. Dr. Wiley was born in New Albany, but grew up in Tupelo and graduated with some folks here in the room. He got his bachelor's degree at Mississippi State in '73, attended the University of Mississippi Medical School, and completed his residency as a OBGYN. And after completing that, he was in the Air Force for 4 years, and then before returning to Jackson. And then he and his wife, Merrie, and I'm pronouncing that right, Dr. Wiley? Merrie? Have been married for 50 years, and after delivering thousands of babies and almost 40 years of practice, he retired in 2020. And I guess, Dr. Wiley, you started writing books, huh? Okay, well, come on up here, please. Y'all welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I remember when this library, it was an old house. I'm sure a lot of y'all remember that, and remember coming to this and then tore it down and then built this. And thank you so much. Yeah, Rick and Jack and I, we graduated together high school back 54 years ago now. It's been a long time. But anyway, thank y'all very much. And yeah, I want to talk about my book, Pushmataha, and just a little bit before, just talk a little bit about my getting into writing. My first book was The Angel of Lockhart, and that was 15 years ago. And this was a family story, and in fact, I presented this here probably about 12 years ago. And it's a family story about my wife's family. In Lockhart, there's a little community just north of Meridian called Lockhart, where my wife's family was from. And her great-grandfather and his second wife buried all 7 of their children in the little cemetery, and they're just lined up there. And she had always told me about this, and I didn't think much about it until we were over there looking at the cemetery one day and realized that no 2 children were alive at the same time. You'd have one live and die, live and die, live and die over a 20-year span. The last one died in 1910. And, it wasn't like an epidemic came through and destroyed this family. And, it made me start thinking, this would make a good story. And everybody's dead, so I didn't hurt anybody's feelings by writing it. And so came up with what I think happened. And it's based on a true story, fictionalized account. And had a lot of fun with that. And then my second book came from that. The telegrapher, great uncle of my wife's, found out that he had lost his arm as a child in the 1890s, and he became a telegraph operator. And so thought, this would make a nice little feel-good, coming-of-age, triumph over adversity book, and so did that and had a lot of fun with that. Took a hiatus after that. I did some writing and all that, but to do things like this, I was still practicing. Take off a day and go somewhere and do this just wasn't feasible. And so after I retired 3 years ago, started back getting into things. And then one that I just did, this guy, Edmund Richardson, when he died in 1886, was the richest man in Mississippi. Controlled more cotton than anybody else in the world. And he's buried in the old cemetery in Jackson, Greenwood Cemetery. And nobody knows that much about him anymore. When he was alive, he was the type person that when he went to New York City, his name was in the paper. Edmund Richardson here with his family staying, and when you go to New Orleans, same thing. And so I wrote a biography on him that was a lot of fun putting together. And then my latest one, this is my father-in-law. And he died about 25 years ago, and when we were going through some of his papers, came across a folder, 50 pages, single-space typed, of his war memoirs. And anyway, I started reading it. It was just a fascinating read. And so I cleaned it up, put it together, put a little history in it, and came up with his story. And in fact, I had these and the one about Edmund Richardson at the not mistletoe, y'all call it, in Jackson, it's Mistletoe Marketplace here at Celebration Village, and sold out of them, so I was very pleased with that. Now, to talk a little bit about Pushmataha, I want to start out reading the first few pages, well, really the first page of my book, and it kind of sets the stage for Pushmataha. And this was in the Washington Gazette, front page, on Christmas Day, or rather Christmas Eve, 1824, 199 years ago. This morning, a few minutes after 12 o'clock, Pushmataha, the principal chief of a district of the Choctaw Nation of Indians, died. He departed this life at the hotel of Mr. Joseph Tennyson in the city, where he had been residing with other Choctaw delegates during their late pending negotiation with the government for the disposal of a portion of the land of the Choctaw. This chief was remarkable for his personal courage and skill in war, having engaged in 24 battles, several of them which were fought under General Jackson. Pushmataha was also a great man of eloquence. He possessed a rich and fertile imagination with a sound understanding and was classed by his Choctaw countrymen among the first of his warriors and was considered the greatest of his orators. He fell victim of the distressing malady of croup. He bore his affliction with great firmness, was conscious of his approaching end, and predicted with unusual sagacity. Has anybody heard that word before? Sagacity? Anyway, it means foresight. I had to look it up, but like a sage, sagacity. The hour at which he would die. This prediction was literally fulfilled. He gave with great composure directions to his family, friends and associates for the disposition of his property, recommended his family to the fatherly care of the nation, and breathed his last amid the tears and regrets of his companions and acquaintances. While living, he had been conciliated the friendship of all who knew him. When he died, he was big news. Front page of the Washington Gazette, 2,000 lined Pennsylvania Avenue to watch his processional. His eulogy was read before the Senate chamber. And, most people now have heard of Pushmataha. There's enough of his name out there where people have an idea but don't realize the impact that he had on our early history. But before getting into Pushmataha a little bit more, we're going to talk a little bit about geography and history and Mississippi and all. This is 1783 when we became a nation. And there's the 13 original colonies, and you have this big, vast wilderness, the Northwest Territory and the Southwest Territory. And then on the other side of the Mississippi River, you have what would later be the Louisiana Purchase. At that time, it was controlled by Spain. Spain turned it over to France in 1800, and we got it in 1803. But that's the way things look. A short 20 years later, this is the way it looked. You had Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee being states. You had the Northwest Territory having been divided up into the Michigan Territory, Illinois, Indiana Territory, and then the Mississippi Territory, which is where we'll concentrate. And then the Louisiana Purchase, which almost doubled the size of the United States and really played a factor in what we did with the Indians. There was now land that we could send them to and get them out of our nation, which is not a very bright spot on our history. But looking at the Mississippi Territory, Mississippi's territory started out in 1798 after a dispute with Spain. They claimed everything up to where the Yazoo River flowed in, which is about the 32nd parallel. And we claimed everything down to the 31st parallel, which is the present lower part of the main part of the body of the state. It was finally settled in 1798. We got that. And then in 1804, the upper two-thirds of the state was added. It had originally been claimed by Georgia. They finally gave it up, and it became part of the Mississippi Territory. And then last, Spain gave another portion, which became the Boot Hills of Mississippi and Alabama, and then we became a state in 1817. A lot of people don't realize it, but the territory almost came into the Union as one state. And if that had happened, we would have been the largest state east of the Mississippi. But it was one of those things, politics came in to play here.
We would have had a hell of a football team.
Yeah, right, that's right, we would have. Just think of what kind of, Alabama would be ours, wouldn't it? But at the time, early on in the territory, most of the population was coming in the Natchez area, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more. But and Natchez was controlling all this, and so they wanted one big state, that they could control. Well, after the Creek Wars, which ended in 1814, there was a lot of Creek territory opened up in Alabama, and people started flooding in Alabama, and all of a sudden the population of Alabama became more than Mississippi. And so the people in Natchez says, no, we don't want to be one state now, we want two, because we want at least control. And so that it was divided, and Alabama became a state 2 years later in 1819. During this time that we were formulating, there was a major thing that happened. Can anybody guess what it was? Huh? That happened too, but something that really revolutionized the South, changed markets. Cotton. Anyway, cotton. And when we became a nation in 1783, 94% of clothing in the civilized world, in Europe, North America, was wool. Very little cotton was being grown. Cotton was very expensive. It did not grow in Europe. It grew in the Middle East. Processing cotton was extremely expensive, and only the rich could afford cotton, and everybody else wore wool. But several things happened around the time that we became a territory that changed all that. There was first the fly shuttle loom made weaving cloth much easier, and then the next thing was a spinning machine to spin the thread, and made it a lot easier to make the thread. And then steam engine came along in 1765, which made energy mobile. You didn't have to be beside a big river to get machines to run. And then the big one was the cotton gin in 1794, which was right in the middle of when we were becoming formulating our state. And before the invention of cotton gin, have any of y'all ever pulled lint off of a seed, cotton seed? It's work. And to get a pound of cotton lint, is what they call it, would take you hours. And all of a sudden they could do large amounts of this, totally revolutionized the processing and making of cotton. And then another thing, cotton was being developed or had developed in the Old World and New World at the same time for thousands of years. In the Americas, it wasn't used a whole lot, and in fact, the colonists early in the southern parts of the U.S. used it a little bit for their own use, but they found that the American cotton was much better than the Asian cotton. It had a longer strand, it wouldn't break as easy, it was softer, and all of a sudden the American strain of cotton overtook. In fact, right now, just about all cotton grown throughout the world originated, it's called upland cotton or Mexican cotton or American cotton. And then the next big thing that really affected us was Mississippi was ideal for growing cotton. Our cold springs or wet springs, cool springs, hot summers, dry falls, it was just perfect for growing cotton. By 1820, the largest export for the United States was cotton overseas, and there was more cotton being sent over there, and all of a sudden things changed to where it wasn't the rich wearing cotton, but everybody. It became the cloth of the common person. And so Mississippi became the new promised land, and people started flooding into, during the formation of the territory, to try to make their fortune. A lot of them did. And a lot of you probably know that at one time there were more millionaires in Natchez per capita than anywhere in the world. And, you know, Mississippi was very rich at that time. Most of them started out coming in the southwest Mississippi Basin. That's the Natchez area. And we all know that later the Yazoo River Basin became the big delta where cotton really took hold. All right, that's Mississippi. Now let's talk about the Indians a little bit, and then we'll get back a little bit toward Pushmataha. At the time of the formation of our country, this is what the Indian presence looked like for the most part. These are the major tribes. There are a lot of other minor tribes, but you have the Northeast, the Iroquois, the Delaware, Powhatans, and then up in the Northwest, the Chippewas and Miamis, Illinois, Shawnee, and then down in our area in the South, you had 5 major tribes. You had the Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw. And getting a little bit, those 5 tribes in the South were called the 5 civilized tribes, and they were given that name back in the 1700s because they were easier to work with. They weren't quite as warring. I mean, they warred a lot among themselves, but they were much easier to deal with. And this is what their nations look like in about 1800. And they all had a common ancestry. Their language is very similar, even though a little bit different. Their customs were very similar. This is what Mississippi looked like in the late 1700s. Over a dozen different tribes, and by the 1820s and 30s, there were only two major tribes left, the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. Chickasaw, which was in this area, northern third of the state, Choctaw, the lower two-thirds. And, you know, the Pascagoula, Biloxi, somebody said they never realized that Biloxi was named after an Indian tribe. You know, there are a lot of rivers in Mississippi, a lot of towns, counties that are named Indian names. And in fact, does anybody know what Oklahoma means? Oklahoma is a Choctaw word meaning red man. And so red people, red man, Oklahoma. But anyway, this is, okay, in 1800, this is what the Choctaw Nation looked like. They went from the Mississippi River over to the Alabama River, and then from the 31st parallel up to essentially the Yallabusha River basin, and then your Chickasaw were north of that. And the other thing that's interesting is that every bit of this land in 1800 belonged to the Indians. Not a single square foot belonged to a white man. Okay, what was happening? People were migrating in here, cotton, and they were settling in here, and they were essentially squatters. There was a treaty that in 1786, before the big migration happened, that was Treaty of Hopewell, that was made with the 5 civilized tribes, that said that no white man would be allowed to settle or make claim to any Choctaw land. And so you had a big problem there. All these people coming in, they were squatters. Something had to be done. And so what happened? That's treaties. Okay, over about a 30-year span, the Choctaw Nation gave up all of their land. The first treaty, as you would expect, Fort Adams in 1801 in the Natchez area, which had been the original big migration, was about, I think it was about 5 million acres right there that was given over. The second one was in the north of Mobile in 1803. That was where the other big migration was coming in, because the northern part of Alabama was still pretty much controlled by the Creek, and they were a little bit more forceful in not letting people in. And so this is where it initially came. And then the third treaty, Mount Dexter. And, you know, when you're driving around Mississippi, you'll see these little signs all over. And over close to Macon, there's a little sign about Treaty of Mount Dexter, you know, and it says 5 miles this away, you know, it was done. Then Treaty of Doak-Stan in 1820, and then the last treaty was the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, which is the one that, you know, most of us are more familiar with, because that was the last one. In 1830, there was the Indian Removal Act that was passed in Congress, and that was that no Indian tribe could function as an independent unit east of the Mississippi River. And if they wanted to function as a tribe, they had to go somewhere else. And there was land that had been given to the Choctaws through Doak-Stan in Oklahoma, and we all know what happened, the Trail of Tears. The Choctaws were the first that experienced the Trail of Tears. And there were, at the time of the treaty, there were about 25,000 Choctaw in Mississippi. 16,000 migrated. And of that 16,000, 2,500 died on the way. It was one of the worst winters that had occurred, and a lot of them starved to death, froze to death, and so it was very bleak. 6,000 stayed in Mississippi, and that's what would become the Mississippi band of the Choctaw Indians. And, but for about 80 years, they were just forgotten. And they started out at about 6,000. They dwindled to about 2,000 over 80 years, and it just stuck in poverty. And finally, in 1945, Roosevelt passed the Indian Reorganization Act, which allowed the Indians to reorganize their tribes, and that's where we got the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. And then Pontotoc Creek, you know, that 1832, 2 years later, was the treaty that gave up the land here. Does anybody know what Pontotoc means? Land of hanging grapes. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, but and so the Chickasaw Cherokee, all those had the same experience in moving out. The thing about Chickasaw, none of them stayed. All of them left. That's why there's no Chickasaw Nation in North Mississippi. And most of us, when we think of the Trail of Tears, we think of the Cherokee. You know, that's the one. That's the one. And a lot of that is, how many of y'all seen Unto These Hills? You know, if you go to the Smokies, you got to go see Unto These Hills, and so that has kept them in the forefront. Whereas everybody else, well, really, the Choctaws and Chickasaw, yes, they had the same experience. This is the sign on the banks of Dancing Rabbit Creek that was put there by a DAR chapter in Columbus back years ago as a spot where Dancing Rabbit was signed. And then this just shows the Seminoles at the time of the last treaties. These are the lands. The dark green was all that was left of those nations. Like the Seminole had given up everything except that area, and they migrated over to Oklahoma. You have the Cherokee Creek, Chickasaw and Choctaw, and that was the Trail of Tears. All right, and then Pushmataha, as I said, he was really one of those guys that legends were made of. He was well known. He was almost like a Daniel Boone figure, you know, just larger than life. He was in the papers all the time. Wherever he went, people wanted to meet him. He was, and he's pretty much just been forgotten. And we don't know a lot about his early history. He was born, we think, around 1764. His parents were both killed at some point, I think probably in some Indian raid or whatever. And we do know that he had a sister, and his sisters had two daughters. His name was Cravat, C-R-A-V-A-T. And his Kravitz and his wife had two daughters that both married Louis LaFleur. And, and we know, where Jackson is, that was LaFleur's bluff. And anyway, one of those was the mother of Greenwood LaFleur, who everybody's heard of. And then I found out just a few weeks ago that Steve White right there, my brother-in-law, is a direct descendant of Pushmataha. That and it,
Maybe you can walk around the room.
that's right. Yeah. But he called me up a few weeks ago, and someone had sent you some genealogy stuff, and Pushmataha's daughter, Running Deer, married some man, and anyway, it goes 6 generations back, and so that was a little lagniappe right there that we found. But Pushmataha, he was just a renowned warrior in his early years, fighting against the Osage across the Mississippi, fighting against the Creek, and they didn't battle that much with the Chickasaw. They got along a little bit better. There were some fighting, but he was made his name as a warrior. And then during the War of 1812, he was a very big proponent of supporting the United States. And he realized at the time that, the United States was taking over to fight, they were going to lose. Like so many of the tribes that fought, especially out west, they were annihilated, and he didn't want that to happen. And so he did all he could. And there was, at one point, the Choctaws were looking very much in fighting with the Creek. And if that had happened, it would have probably changed the whole dynamics of the South at that time. But Pushmataha single-handedly pretty much had them fighting with them. And it was the Choctaw Battalion that he was the leader of. And then General Jackson once said that he was the bravest warrior he'd ever known. And then once he got his fighting out of his system, he became an orator. And he had one of these, you hear about the Indians and their flowery speech and all that. Well, he had it. And all of his speeches were just fascinating. He couldn't speak a word of English. In fact, there was an interpreter, John Pitchlin, and he's buried out from Columbus, over close to where old Waverly is. But John Pitchlin was, his father had come into the Choctaw Territory sometime in the 1780s, brought his little son John with him, and was there on business and died. And so John was adopted by the Choctaw, grew up, and he became the primary interpreter for all the treaties, all through the Choctaw history. And he and Pushmataha were about the same age. But a lot of people say that a lot of the flowering of his speeches was made even more flowery by John Pitchlin and the way he wrote it. But that's where we get a lot of his. And he was he was present at all the treaties except for the last one, Dancing Rabbit, because he had died 6 years earlier than that. But he was the principal negotiator on 3 of them. And but as I said, he knew that negotiation was the only way to go, that you delay as much as you can, you get as much concessions as you can, but realizing that you're going to lose. And they knew that there was no way that they were going to keep their land. And he went to Washington twice. Once in the early 1800s on treaty business and met with Thomas Jefferson. And then when he went up in 1824 on another treaty negotiation, that's when he died. And but just a very, very important figure. And this is his tombstone. He's buried in the Old Congressional Cemetery in Washington, and very interesting fellow. A little bit about my book, and first I'm going to talk about the picture. This is the most famous picture of Pushmataha, and most of you have probably seen that before. The uniform was given to him by General Jackson, and he was made an honorary brigadier general after the Creek Wars, and given that uniform. And when this was painted about 2 months before he died in Washington, and in 1820, the Bureau of Indian Affairs were having all these Indians coming in from all over with treaty negotiation, land negotiation, and the director of the Indian Affairs realized these people are going to disappear. And most of them came in all their regalia, and a lot of the old pictures of chiefs like Tecumseh and all those that you see, those were painted by a guy named Charles Bird King, and this was painted by him. And he painted over 150 different portraits of Indians, and this, there were 3 portraits painted by him of Pushmataha. 2 of them were destroyed in the fire of the Smithsonian in 1856. This one was destroyed, but someone had painted a copy, and so this is not the original one, but and in fact, there's one other original. It used to be Warner Lumber over in Alabama. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. They had a huge collection of art, Indian art, and Warner, the old man, died several years ago, and that stuff has been dispersed. And I could not find where that other picture is now, but I'm sure some collector has bought it. But anyway, it's just very interesting about that picture. And then as far as writing the book, when I was doing some investigating on my first two books, all of it was in the Meridian area, and I kept coming across stuff about the Choctaw and just started getting interested in it. And that eulogy, the front page on the Washington, I happened to come across that and some old stuff, and I said, that guy was pretty famous. And so the more I looked at it, realized nobody had really written a lot about him in the past 50 years, and I said, well, this would be something fun to just put together, and started working on it, and that's where this developed. The way I wrote it, I wrote it more as a narrative rather than strictly history. Okay, a lot of times people get bogged down in history, a lot of facts, and you just get tired of reading. This is in a more conversational form. There's dialogue between the characters. It follows. I had the story follow a pipe that was given to Pushmataha's father as a child, and Pushmataha's father when Pushmataha was a child, and followed that pipe through the whole thing. And it gives a little continuity along, and whereas all the stories within the story are real, conversations are fictionalized. And but anyway, that's my book. And questions. I'm open to questions, and I'm not a true historian, so I know a little bit about this because I've done a lot of work, but I'm not a true historian, but I'll answer what I can. Yeah.
Thomas, I don't know, little or none maybe about the efforts to bring a Chickasaw Cultural Heritage Center up to the Natchez Trace outside Tupelo. Are you somewhat familiar with that? Or?
Yeah, in fact, one of my sisters gave me the article that was in the paper.
Jamie Garner's the president of our foundation.
Okay.
It's called the Econo Foundation. But anyway, in your research, did you come up with much conversation between the Choctaws and the Chickasaws, and then either Pushmataha directly or with the Chickasaws?
No, and then really not. No, did not come with any of that. And but Palmingo or Palminco, I think is how they're calling him now. They were contemporaries because I think, huh?
They originally were the same tribe when they crossed the Mississippi River.
Right. Yeah. Common ancestry. Right.
And Kentucky and got to our area.
Right.
And the Chickasaws said this is the homeland.
Right.
And the Choctaws did not agree, and they went farther south.
Well,
And
yeah.
that was the two.
Right.
When they divided, and maybe that's when they took the names.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Archaeology will pretty much back that up.
Right.
Early in the year, I read a biography of Palminco, and he was the signer of that Treaty of Hopewell.
Mm-hmm.
He signed for the Chickasaws.
Right.
So, I just wondered, that was going to be my question, did you have any evidence of the two great chiefs?
Being together.
And that treaty was signed over a period of time, so, one came in and
Right.
signed and left, and then another group.
Right. But as far as any conversation or any dealing between the two, I don't
Well,
know.
the Choctaws aligned themselves with the French who were trading
Right.
in the area, and the Chickasaws aligned themselves with the English.
Right.
And it was pretty much the same feeling as the English and French.
Right.
It was, and the Natchez became a part of the Chickasaw nation before they left,
Yeah.
and that because they were fighting the French too.
Yeah. Yeah, because the Natchez, in 1729, they were pretty much just wiped out. And those that were left over assimilated either with the Chickasaw or Choctaw. A lot of them were sold into slaves, sent down to Cuba, the Natchez.
When you talk about
reservations on any of these tribes, and I think the Choctaws were around Philadelphia, right?
Mhm.
Did each of their territories have one reservation or several? How does that work today?
Okay, there's the Oklahoma Band of Choctaw Indians up there, and they've got a big area. If you look on a map of Oklahoma, they've got a section. In fact, each one of the tribes has a section of land that's their reservation. The Mississippi Band were given several sections, so it's not one big area. And so there are a lot of different areas. And there's some areas like where Greenwood LaFleur is buried, over close to Carrollton. There's an area, big area of land that's part of the Choctaw reservation there. I don't know if any Choctaw live there or not, but it's part of the reservation. But the primary part of it is down around Philadelphia.
Well, they elect a chief every year in Philadelphia area, I think. But you're saying that covers
Mhm.
all of the.
There's one chief for the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, yeah.
I'm trying to get the dates straight in my head. Did Pushmataha died before the Trail of Tears?
Yes. He died in 1824, and then the Trail of Tears was 1830 to 1832 in that range. Yeah, Bobby.
We lived in Ohio for 10 years, very familiar with Shawnee and Chief Tecumseh. The story goes that he rode his horse down from Ohio to leave Pushmataha to get him to join forces to go to war, to drive the white man back out of the territory. Can you comment on that, maybe?
Yeah, in fact, it's in the book. In fact, there was a contingency with Tecumseh that came down. They met first with the Chickasaw, and the Chickasaw said, "No, we're not going to join y'all." Came down to the Choctaw area, and Pushmataha was the one that pretty much turned the wave right there. I mean, it was pretty, because they voted. They had this big, conclave meeting, and Pushmataha gave his talk. Tecumseh gave his talk. Pushmataha said why not to do it. They voted, and it was almost split. And anyway, they turned it over to a medicine man and let him decide. Anyway, it's in the book, and the medicine man said, we're going to stick with the Americans. And anyway, that's why they didn't join. But then they went on to the Creek Nation, and the Creeks joined them. And that's why you had the Creek during the War of 1812, the Creek Wars. The Creeks were fighting against Andrew Jackson in the United States. But yes.
I'm curious, and this is just irrelevant, but so many people claim that they have Indian ancestry, and my father told me that one of my great-great-grandmothers was full-blooded Cherokee. I had my DNA done, and there is absolutely no Indian here.
Well,
Now, we do have in the family, but she's a great niece, and evidently that came from her maternal side. So why does everybody around here claim to have Indian
'Cause-
heritage when the Indians were so mistreated and so isolated, couldn't possibly have been that much contact between the Indians and white people?
because they may want to run for Senate at some time.
Well, some people move to Oklahoma to claim to be Indian to get that money somehow.
Well,
I have a relative who moved out there.
They are very strict with that. I can't remember but once you get down a little bit from, first, second generation of Indians, you can't get any money from them. And so you just,
Dog roll.
huh?
It's the dog roll.
Yeah.
That they go by. They're the ones that were on the Trail of Tears. I know the Chickasaw
Yeah.
says that's how and they keep up with it from there.
Yeah.
But somebody did say the Cherokees were the upper side of the Indians, and so therefore people claim to be Cherokee because they were at the top of the house. So I don't know
Yeah,
about
I
that,
don't
because I
know.
never did pursue it, but, my grandmother was born in 1867, my grandfather, so they have, go back a while.
Right.
I think those folks that claim that also went to Woodstock and saw Elvis.
That was it. But we do know one, he's got the papers to prove it back there. Steve does. Yes.
Jack and I just went to a type 1 diabetes meeting in Toronto. It was held there because insulin was founded 100 years ago this year. And our son has type 1 diabetes. But the chairman of the board from Canada, JDRF in Canada, began her talk, which was going to be about diabetes, thanking the fathers, the Indian fathers, and saying we stand on the shoulders of, and I can't remember which tribe it is, but we stand on their shoulders and we're on their land. And afterwards, and then she proceeded to go into her talk about diabetes, but after it was over, I said, that was so interesting. She goes, oh, we always do that. We always acknowledge that in our remarks.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting thing.
Yes.
Did you come across any connection with the many warrior Indian man down south? That was the mother man.
Yeah, and it talks about it in the book too, but that was supposed to be, they came out of, one of their ancestral stories is that's where they emerged from, that both them and the Chickasaw came from. But
Where did Pushmataha live in Mississippi?
he was born in the Macon area, and pretty much in that area, Macon to Meridian, that's where the biggest conclaves of Choctaw were, and he lived in that area. And
Did you get into the Battle of Acquia at all in your book?
No, see, that was quite a bit before, and I just bought the Piamenco book that Mitch Caver. Yeah, because when I saw that, which one of y'all gave me that article? Larry gave me that article about it. And anyway, when I started with that, I said, I need to learn more about Piamenco, and so I started looking and found that book, and it came in the mail last week.
Where was the mother around in Mississippi? Where was the mother around in Mississippi?
It's down west of Macon. It's between Macon and Louisville.
Right close to Knoxville.
Yeah, down in that area. Yeah, we went down there, and it's a neat little mound. Yes.
So you have the pipe?
Yes, I have the pipe.
Do you mind telling us how you acquired the pipe? Was that your grandfather?
No. That part of the story is fictionalized, and the pipe. And anyway, no. I'm not going to say any more about it because they need to read that. The people that haven't. I know you just got through reading it, so. But anyway, don't want to spoil. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the story in the old Mississippi history books that talk about when Pushmataha, how he was born? And I can't remember exactly, but it was supernatural, almost like, right?
That's-
It was like a storm
that's in the
came,
book.
trees fell
His whole speech is that talk that was during the Treaty of Dokestan, and that was a big deal. The Treaty of Dokestan. There were reporters from all over the United States that came down to witness this and to watch the proceedings and all. And one of the reporters asked Pushmataha, said, you've never revealed where you came from. Your parents, who are they? And tell us a little bit about your history. And so he gets up and gives this flowery thing about this storm coming through and this lightning hitting this oak tree, and out springs Pushmataha. And so that's in that whole story's in the book. Yeah. And I've got copies of the book if anybody's interested. I got a few copies of The Angel of Lockhart and the Telegrapher. Anybody wants that too, but I'll be glad to sell those to you. All right, thank you.
That was the most interesting talk and presentation, Dr. Wiley. We certainly do appreciate it. And I hope I'll have a few of those under the Christmas tree. Brenda, hint, hint. In a few minutes, I think, Lisa, at 1 o'clock. Do you want to go up?
Yeah.
Say a few words? Okay, thank you.
And I'm going to ask Virginia, Tolliver, and Jack, and Harold, and our librarians to come up. This is part of our committee. Afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Tupelo Reads Committee, some of whom are here, Julie Gibbons was going to come, but she hasn't made it. But we have a book for you